This little thing, my friends, is the Sony 50mm F2.5 G.
It's tiny, as you can see, going to be great for travel, great for filmmaking and video shooters, and here are some specs to get you going on this lens. Just a fantastic, compact, and barely noticeable lens when it's in your bag. We're going to break this thing down in its entirety to figure out whether or not it's going to be a good one for you. Now, who would I recommend this lens to? Well, not a beginner, but more of an intermediate and on the way to professional. In terms of video making, that's probably where this thing's gonna shine the most. Now, with that out of the way, let's dive into the nitty-gritty and get into the build and features of this lens.
So having a look at the build, the lens body is mainly aluminum. Incredibly, it measures only 1.8 inches long with the lens hood off and weighs only 6.1 ounces. In terms of buttons and switches, it still manages to find room for a little focus hold button, as well as an automatic manual focus switch. Although they're so small, I find them a little bit hard to use. It also does have a click switch, which is going to be handy for your aperture ring, and this is going to let you choose between hard stops and a nice smooth feel. On the front of the lens, you'll find a tiny little objective with 49mm filter threads. Not a ton of glass to worry about scratches here. On the back, a standard metal mount with the addition of a rubber gasket for confidence when it comes to weather sealing. Overall, for me, it's a well put together lens with some of the features that you wouldn't expect just because of its size. For build, I give this lens 4 stars. Next, we'll have a look at performance. Now, as a rule, lenses are getting better and smaller all the time, every day in fact, but it's important to keep your expectations in line when it comes to the price of a lens. Having a look at the autofocus here, it's very impressive given the size of this lens. 2 linear focus motors drive this quickly and accurately, and it's nearly silent, making this a fantastic option for video. Next, when it comes to manual focus, it does have a very tiny manual focus ring, which is easy to slip off and sometimes blow past your subject, but it does have a really nice linear response, a natural feeling and handling of manual focus. So overall, it's a lot better than a lot of lenses that I've used. Again, really making this lens ideal for video, but if you have bigger hands, it just might take a little bit of getting used to. Now, this lens, like many, does suffer from some focus breathing, and unfortunately it's not one of the ones on the list that can take advantage of Sony's focus breathing compensation. So it is what it is and something to note. Next, here are some photo examples shot with this lens, and let's have a deeper look into the optics and overall sharpness and quality that you get as well. Now, having 7 aperture blades, the bokeh and out of focus backgrounds that you can get is decent, but definitely nothing out of this world. You can definitely get some beautiful renderings with this lens, and to help with that is its close minimum focus distance of about 13.8 inches with autofocus and down to 12.2 inches with manual focus. This is going to give you a maximum magnification ratio of 0.21 times. Now let's jump in and have an even more detailed look at the sharpness of this lens. And here's a quick look at the sharpness in detail of this lens, starting wide open at f2.5 here. And here's the center of the image as we go in here. We can see just a little hint of chromatic aberration. We can see it even more if we go in further. A little bit to speak of there, which is a little bit odd for me. The sharpness overall is quite good. But what about the corners? If we go and have a look here in the corners, it's a fairly decent performance, just a tiny bit of softness to speak of, and a little bit of vignetting that we'll get into in a bit here. As we stop down to f3.5 here, you can see it brighten up, and that sharpness definitely does improve, although it's a great performance across the board. Next, down to f5.6, we can see it improve even further. A really good performance now from edge to edge. And stopping down to f8, no complaints there. It's going to be great all the way till about, let's have a look here, about f16 is where you start to notice a little bit of degradation, but a completely usable image still. And we can go all the way down to f22 and still have a completely usable image. So really not a whole ton of complaints here. You can see a little bit of haziness on this side, and that's just because that's the direction of my light. Overall, for the sharpness of this lens, it's not the sharpest I've ever seen, but a great performer nonetheless. In terms of distortion and vignetting, we can see a little bit of distortion here, nothing too crazy, and there is a bit of vignetting here, wide open at f2.5 like I mentioned. Hit that profile correction to see that straighten up and lighten up. Really nothing too bad here in terms of distortion and vignetting. Overall, for the sharpness and the optics of this lens, it's not perfect and there's a bit of chromatic aberration to speak of in some instances, but overall, I give it 4 solid stars. Finally, let's talk about the value of this lens. For somebody that absolutely needs the utmost compact, tiny nature of this lens, I'm sure it's got a ton of value. If you're shooting a lot of video and you use a gimbal a lot, then this might be a great lens for you. For me personally, it's really not something that fits into my workflow overly well, but I can see that it could be good for some people. Now at $600 US, there are a few comparables, most notably the Sigma 45mm F2.5. It's also very compact, but doesn't perform quite as well, but you do have to ask yourself if it's worth that extra almost double. For me, this lens is going to get 3.5 stars for value. So wrapping it all up, my friends, a fantastically tiny lens that's not my personal favorite, and I really can't put my finger on it. Maybe it's just a little bit too small for me. I like to have full control over my lenses, and toting around a bigger lens is not a big deal for me. Now, you know I rate things on a scale from never think about again to consider to definitely buy, and for the average photographer and video user, I'd say this is a consider, but if you're a dedicated video user or you need just a very light lens, then I'd strongly consider this one. Make sure you check out my review on the other 2 lenses in this line, the 24 and the 40mm, and make sure you subscribe if you did like this video, guys. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.